All right, going to be doing my Dracula Q&A. I want to thank everyone who sent in these questions. And yeah, if you want to be part of the next Q&A, please check out the link in the description below. That will allow you to head over to my Patreon. And the first tier allows you to access to be part of the next Q&A. It's going to be more horror themed. Obviously, we're in spooky season. We're days away from going into full spooky season now, so it's going to be more Halloween kind of themed Q&As. So we're going to be doing those, and also if you do the first tier, that'll allow you access also to the other things on the first tier, which are things like. Episode reviews. I've been doing episode reviews of Agatha all along and the Penguin, things like that. So I want to thank everyone who did send in questions, and let's get started. So our first set of questions come from Gordon Rajani, who asks, favorite animated Dracula? There's a lot. I know, I would say Alucard, but honestly, number 2, I think my favorite animated Dracula is Castlevania Dracula. I think that's such a great exploration of a character who's kind of one note in the video games, and to see that character, he's wonderfully voiced by Graham McNeil, and it's almost like a Shakespearean tragedy with that character. And also he can walk this line of terrifying and sympathetic, so... but Alucard definitely gets second place, but Castlevania Dracula... I know it's such an easy thing to say, but it's really damn good. Second question. Do you prefer the Universal Dracula movies or the Hammer ones? Oh dear. That's the big question, isn't it? That's always the big question that everyone has to ask. Are you Universal or Hammer? Well, the thing of it is that really Bela only has 2 movies to his name. Dracula and Abbott and Costello meet Frankenstein. That's really the only 2, whereas Christopher Lee has 8, and even though some of them have varying quality, I mean, you can't top the original 1931's gothic atmosphere and everything else, but it depends on the day. I think it really just depends on, do I want to watch a Hammer film, or because they all have their strengths and weaknesses. Yeah. I know it's a cop-out question, but that's the only answer I can give. Third question. What is your favorite monster to pair Dracula up with? I guess as a team-up kind of story, I guess that's the question. I would probably say, my favorite monster to pair him up with is Frankenstein. The Frankenstein monster, mostly because it is a monster that is... Both of them are from old literary and kind of, kick-started, horror today. Without Dracula and Frankenstein and, the Invisible Man or, Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde and of course, Edgar Allan Poe and whatnot, we would definitely not have horror today. So I love the pairing of, the monster and Dracula. Those are the thing of those questions, Gordon. Moving on now to Bill McLaughlin, who asks, do you believe we will ever get an adaptation of Dracula where it faithfully follows the book? I don't think we ever will, because the book itself is kind of, it kind of drags. It really does drag, on more days than not. So therein lies the problem, is that the book does kind of drag, and even the movie, there was a movie called Count Dracula, which was supposed to be a totally faithful adaptation of Dracula, and even had Christopher Lee in it. Wasn't a Hammer film, it was an Italian-made movie. Sorry, I had to hydrate. I think even then it made massive changes. It didn't follow the book. So I don't, because the book is kind of difficult to follow. The closest anyone got was Bram Stoker's Dracula, Francis Ford Coppola's movie, and even then that made drastic changes. So I don't think we ever will, because that book, even as a fan of that book, it does drag at points. Second question. Who is your favorite... what is your favorite Dracula movie? It really depends. I think it just depends on what kind of mood I'm in. Sometimes I'll be like, oh yeah, Bela Lugosi's Dracula is the only Drac for me. Sometimes I'll be like, oh yeah, Horror of Dracula. Or sometimes I'll be like, Bram Stoker's Dracula, you know, the Coppola Dracula, or I'll be in the mood for something else. Hell, even the Batman versus Dracula version has his own strengths and weaknesses. How I'm feeling now, if you were to ask me that question, like what is my favorite Dracula as it stands right now, I would probably say Coppola's movie, just because of the mood I'm in. It just depends on mood. Third question. Who is someone you would want to play Dracula in a future movie or TV show? Oh, wow. That's a good question. What actor would I like to see play Dracula? Oh, man. I know it's kind of an obvious question, but I'd like to see the actor who played Lucifer from the show Lucifer. I can't remember, like, what's his name? What's that actor's name? Like, I don't know his name. I forget it, but, like, the actor who played Lucifer in that show. I think he'd make he just oozes Dracula, and I know it's such a basic answer, but he does fit it. I know another one would be Benedict Cumberbatch. I think he would make a solid Dracula. Also, David Desmelchin. I think he would make a cool Dracula. I've actually said a few times, not on here, but in real life, if there was ever a Bela Lugosi biopic movie, David Desmelchin would be perfect to play Bela Lugosi, and subsequently Dracula in some scenes, because obviously they'd bring that up. So those are my picks. So thank you for those questions, Bill. Moving on now to Hunter Johnson, who asks, have you read or seen Dracula graphic novel from Legendary Comics that Bela Lugosi's like... the Legendary book. I was about to say the Image book. No, I have not read that. For those who don't know, Legendary Comics came out with both Frankenstein and Dracula, where they used the likeness for both Dracula and the monster of Boris Karloff and Bela Lugosi. So no, I know there was a Kickstarter for them, but I never read them. Anyway, second question. Did you know that Universal almost made a movie with Dracula and the Wolfman going head-to-head in a fight that would have been made in color? Oh yeah, I knew about Dracula versus the Wolfman. I know there's the script out there that you can buy and read. It's kind of fucking boring. Yeah, it's pretty fucking boring because it's barely any Wolfman or Dracula. I mean, there's a lot of Dracula, but there's hardly any Wolfman, and there's no real fight between them. And even when there is, it's Talbot in his human form. Yeah. So, there you go. Third question. What are your thoughts on a Dracula AU where I've created as Naraku as Dracula, with Ford as Van Helsing, Ash as Jonathan Harker, Sailor Mercury as Menia, and Steven Universe as John Stewart. That sounds cool. That's really all I got. Sounds interesting. Anyway, thank you for those questions, Hunter Johnson. Moving on to Tom Hibert, who asks, question 1. We've had many versions of Dracula, from the badass Alucard of Helsing, from the very comedic versions of Count Duckula. Had to make your own version of Dracula. How would you make it in terms of setting and character? Okay, I'll answer this one because this is like, you know, making my own version of Dracula. That's kind of what the question is kind of going for here. So my rendition of Dracula is basically, my rendition of how I'd make Dracula is basically, I think what I would do is make him, like, it's Dracula in his early days. Like, I'd have it more of, like, this is a Dracula still learning and still building the legend. Like, he is a vampire. He has become... This is, like... Because all we do, like, we never really have the whole thing of, like... We've had the two things. When Dracula becomes the vampire, or when Dracula's, like, yeah, I've been a vampire for hundreds of years, and now I'm going to be Billy Badass all over the place. I would love to do a story where it's Dracula building his legend. Like, that's what I'd like to do, is, like, he's building the legend of himself. Something like that. Second question. What are your thoughts on the Castlevania version of Dracula? Absolutely love it. Yeah, absolutely love it. It's my favorite version of animated Dracula. I already, yeah. Third question. How would you feel about the toxic relationship of Dracula and Renfield in the movie Renfield? Yeah, I do enjoy Renfield. I really do enjoy that film. I will say that I do know that it's all about toxicity in relationships, and I think the movie handled it pretty well, and I think it's just kind of fun. Well, not the toxic relationship thing. It was played for laughs, but I do appreciate what they... if you're talking about, like, more serious version of how to handle toxic relationships, then toxic/abusive relationships, then, you know, that's Blumhouse's Invisible Man for you. Thank you for those questions, Tom. Moving on now to Brittany Digger, who asks, what are your thoughts on Dracula 2000? It is campy as fucking hell. It's so bad it's good. Like, it's so dumb. Like, it's so pure 2000s. It is, Dracula going into a virgin store, like a virgin, if you guys remember those, going into a virgin store and listening to music, sample music on, it just makes me feel old. Because it's so of its time. It is such a movie of its time. It's pretty fucking hysterical. Anyway. Second question. Have you seen the Spanish version of the 1931 Dracula? I have. I have seen the Spanish version of Dracula. It comes on the DVD collection of this. Yeah. I think it's pretty solid. I really enjoy... I think it's good. Now, to say it's superior than the Bela Lugosi movie is a stretch, at least for me. I think both movies have their own strengths and weaknesses. I think the Spanish version is solid in its own right. But I'm not going to sit here and say which is better or worse. I think they're both equally great. Third question. What do you know about the Icelandic version of the 1897 Dracula novel called Powers of Darkness? I have never heard of that. I don't even, I'm going to have to look at that now. I know a lot of things about Dracula. I never heard of an Icelandic novel from 1897, so I'm going to have to look into that now. Thank you for letting me know. Anyway, thank you for those questions, Brittany. Moving on now to David Deister, who asks, who would you cast as Dracula for the Universal Monsters Cinematic Universe? I'm going to answer this one because... this is for a new Universal Monsters Cinematic Universe. I just take the picks I'd have earlier, one of those. Second question. What would Dracula think of Lucifer Morningstar from Has-Been Hotel? Kind of think of him as a bitch, honestly. I think he would be kind of seen as that. Third question. If Dracula was in a death battle, who would his opponent be and why? It depends on which Dracula, right? Like, it really just kind of depends as to which Dracula we're using for this scenario, am I right? I think the Dracula I would use would probably be, classic Dracula, if that's the one we're going to go with, like, classic novelization. I'd say just for the novel, just have him fight the Frankenstein monster. Yeah. So thank you for those questions, David. Moving on now to Jason Voorhees 2011. First question. Who is your favorite actor to have portrayed Dracula? That's always the age-old question, right? Like, whenever I do these Q&As, I'm like, yep, I know this question's coming. So I think if I was to pick one person... see, they're all, the three best performances are always Lugosi, Oldman, and Lee, right? And it's like trying to pick your favorite child. It's difficult to say, like, who would you honestly pick to answer it, like, to do something like that, right? I'm gonna say... because they just have, like, I think I'm gonna lean towards Oldman. Again, it depends on... it varies. It really does. Second question. Do you think more films like Last Voyage of the Demeter that adapt portions of the novel rather than try to condense the whole book, or what? Oh, what do you think of... I'm trying to word this. Do you think films like Last Voyage of the Demeter that adapt portions of the novel rather than try to condense the whole book into one film could work? Yeah. I just wish Last Voyage of the Demeter did well. I really did like that movie, and I liked the premise. But yeah, I think that could really work. As for where else in the Dracula mythos that could work, probably, like, talk about Jonathan Harker's lost days of being slave to the brides. That'd be a cool, like, psychological thriller. Third question. Have you ever seen the, out there to say the least, Dario Argento Dracula movie? Argento's Dracula 3D. Yes, I have watched it. I've watched it several times. That movie, I'm not going to spoil for anything, but it's going to, for, like, people who love films, like, from Dario Argento, like, Suspiria, or Tenebrae, or, he's a king of giallo films. But if you watch Argento's Dracula 3D, you are going to think to yourself, there's no fucking way this is Dario Argento. For multitude of reasons. I will say Thomas Kretschmann, who plays Dracula, I think he does a really good job. But yeah, I've seen it. Anyway, so thank you for those questions, Jason. Moving on now to Alistair Bondman, who asks, we've seen countless versions of Dracula as the classic Eastern European vampire archetype, but would you be open to having the kind of vampire Dracula is, or even have his nationality changed to fit other vampire types from other cultures, like the snake vampire from Dusk Till Dawn and their Latin American flavor, or hopping vampires from China, or just plain weird shit like you see in the Filipino vampires? I think it just depends on what I think, like I have done in the Universal Monster Disney AUs. I had Marco as that version of Dracula, where he is a Mesoamerican vampire who was given his powers by Camazotz, the god of the underworld. So I think it could work, and that would be the angle I'd go with. So I think it can be done. Second question. Old Fangface has had a whole lot of weird adaptations over the years, making him Judas Iscariot to the first vampire, and to the Split then created the Nosferatu and Count Orlok in World of Darkness, making Dracula a member of the clan Tamir. What's your favorite bonkers tale of Dracula and why? I don't really have one. I just kind of prefer Dracula as just like Dracula. Just kind of like, yeah. The Judas Iscariot one especially, I was like, what? Yeah. Third question. While most people focus on the shitty Tom Cruise Mummy movie for killing the dark universe in its crib, there was a previous attempt to create an interconnected cinematic universe, a movie monster universe at least, which started and ended with Dracula Untold, which most people forget even existed. If that proto-dark universe got off the ground, what monster would you like next, or would you want Dracula Untold to be, to be about? I think like the next, I think initially there was a plan to bring Luke Evans' Dracula back into the fold if Dark Universe did well. I think that was the plan. Like, oh yeah, we can still save it. Like, we can still save this Dark Universe and still use Dracula Untold and bring it back. I mean, I think that was a plan at one point. But, I think, like, if I was to do a second one, maybe have Dracula start looking for recruits for his army or something. I don't know. Thank you for those questions, Alistair. Moving on now to Cyborg 19.99, who asks, what would you do, how would you do a Vampire Hunter D and Dracula crossover? Probably have it that maybe Dracula has, used magic to pull himself into that world, because it's more of a world of vampires. Have the two fight. That's what the best I could do right off the top of my head. Second question. How would an interaction between Blade and Dracula be like? Oh, they interact all the time. Dracula's in the Marvel Universe. Yeah, they've interacted all the time. Those two fucking hate each other. So, yeah, there's... yeah, they're already interacting enough. Yeah. Think of those questions, Cyborg. Moving on now to Dominique Fuentes, who asks, would Dracula make a great Manhattan Clan villain a great villain for the Manhattan Clan from Gargoyles? Yeah, Greg Weisman really wants Dracula in his universe. He's teased, Weisman has teased Dracula multiple times in the Gargoyles lore. So I think at some point we are going to get Dracula in the Dynamite comics, at least. At least that's my thought. That's my thought on it. Second question. What would Dracula from fiction think of Vlad the Impaler of our world? I think he would be impressed. I think he would be... like, you do pretty good work, kid. Let me show you how a real tyrant can go. Yeah. Third question. How scary is the fictionalized Dracula if he ended up in real life? Pretty scary. I think like he would just be like a disease on the planet. Anyway, thank you for those questions, Dominique. Moving on now to Nola Nunejo, who asks, how would you write a Dracula comic book ongoing series? Like I said, I think what I'd like to do is like Dracula building his legend. Not so much a year one. We've had that with Dracula, like so many stuff of Vlad Tepes becoming Dracula. I would like to do a story of Dracula like building up his legend, something like that. Second question. What cryptid would you like to see Dracula fight? Kind of like to see Dracula fight, the Beast of Brayro to be a cool vampire werewolf fight. I think that'd be cool. Favorite comic book version of Dracula. I kind of cheat here, but I think my favorite comic book version of Dracula would be... Marvel would be second place, but I think the one I really like is the Dracula we got from the Batman versus Dracula movie. He was just like this animalistic, suave predator. So, yeah. Anyway, so those are all the questions. I want to thank everyone who sent in questions for this Q&A. This was a lot of fun, and like I said, if you'd like to be part of the next Q&A, just hit the link below, head on to my Patreon, and you guys can do so. Other than that, hope you all enjoyed this. I'm Mr. Multiverse. I'll see you next time in the Multiverse.